discussions. And from now, today onwards, I'll be dealing up with topics what are of community medicine. So, beginning with the community medicine discussions, and one of the very hot and burning topics, what are very frequently asked in the community medicine exams, is about the case control versus the cohort study. So today I'll be discussing about the important differences as to how we can very easily differentiate between the case control study and the cohort study. So students, the case control and the cohort study, they are mostly coming under the analytic category, analytical experiment studies, epidemiological studies, where it is a subdivision of the analytic studies. So the case control and the cohort studies, I'll be discussing the important differences between these two topics and the mnemonics as to how we can very easily remember. So students, beginning with the topic, that is the first is the case control and the cohorts. So the briefly understanding as to what is the case control study. So in the case control, the word case and the control. So case is usually going to refer to the patients who are actually having the disease, and whereas control, it refers to the healthy individuals. So whenever in a survey or in an epidemiological study, what the patients who are having the disease, they have been called as the case, whereas those who are the healthy individuals, for comparison, it is the control. So students, the thing what becomes very difficult to remember in the exams as to what is the first and the foremost thing to be written, because the case control study, it usually starts with the disease, and we look back, we look into the history of the patient, whether how the patient was exposed to that particular risk factor by which it is he is or she is going to have the disease. So beginning with the case control study, the first point what is there, it starts with the disease and proceeds from effect to cause. So students, do remember, it is the case control study which is going to proceed from effect to the cause. Means firstly, the patient is going to come, the patient who is there in our clinic, the patient is already having the disease. For example, if a cancer patient is coming to the clinic and we are observing that he's having an oral cancer. So this is the effect what we are actually observing within the patient, and we need to introspect as to, by looking at the previous history of the patient, as to how this cancer developed in that patient. So the case control study, it basically emphasizes on, while we look at the cause of the disease from the effect to the cause, that the effect has already, we are observing it, and we are moving on to the looking for the cause as to what has actually caused the disease. So that's why it is also called as the retrospective study. So students, the case control study, it is a retrospective study because it is proceeding from effect to cause, while the other, that is the cohort study, it starts with the population exposed to the risk factor and proceeds from cause to effect. So here it is just the reverse of the case control. There it was effect to cause in case control, whereas in case of cohort study, it is from cause to effect. Means firstly, we are defining a particular population and observing that whether that particular population is going we will expose that particular population to a particular risk factor, and then we are going to see the outcome of that exposure of the risk factor. So firstly, for example, if I take a particular geographical area and I start giving those particular inhabitants of that area tobacco, I distributed tobacco among those people. So initially I am distributing tobacco, and after 10 years, if those people are consuming tobacco, after 10 years I'll be coming and looking at as to how many of the total population is suffering from cancer. So students, do remember that is the cohort study. It starts with the population who is exposed to a particular risk factor, and then we proceed from the cause to the effect. That is, it is also called as the prospective study. So cohort study is a prospective study where we move from the cause to the effect. Moving on to the next difference, that is uh, the case control study produces results very quickly, whereas the cohort study, the results get delayed due to long follow-up periods. So for example, the example what I have already taken in case of a cohort study, if a particular area, if a particular population of a geography, I am observing that whether these people are consuming tobacco, and after 10 years, after 5 years, after 15 years, if I'm going to observe such people, I will look for that's to how much of the population is going to have the particular disease. So the results in case of a cohort study, it gets delayed due to long follow-up periods, because I need to continuously examine those people who are consuming tobacco in a particular area and look for the disease, in how much time the disease is occurring. So the cohort study, in that the results of the study gets delayed due to the long follow-up periods. Moving on to the third important point of differentiation. So the case control study, it includes less subjects. Obviously, when it is an retrospective study, the patients who are reporting to us with the disease, we are going to observe them. Then obviously, the case control study involves a lesser subjects, whereas moving on to the cohort study, it includes a large number of subjects. By that example what I have taken, we can very easily make out that we are moving from the cause to the effect. So it is going to involve a large number of subjects. Moving on to the next important point of differentiation, that is the case control study is a first approach for testing a hypothesis. So since the case control study it's a retrospective study, that is from the effect to the cause, so the case control study, it is the first approach for testing a hypothesis. First approach for testing a hypothesis. Supposing if a patient is coming to us with oral cancer, we formulate a particular opinion, we formulate in our brain that this cancer might be due to certain so and so reasons. So the case control study, it is the first approach where we are actually going to test a particular hypothesis. Moving on to the cohort study. So in case of a cohort study, the cohort study is used for testing a previously formed hypothesis. What hypothesis has been previously already formed, if we want to test that particular hypothesis, the cohort study is being used. Moving on to the next point of differentiation, the case control study is less expensive, since we just need to go into the case history, the previous history of the patient, the risk factor to which the patient was exposed in case of a case control study. So it is less expensive, whereas in case of a cohort study, since we are taking a particular sample of a population and doing the research work in that particular area, after certain period of time, we need to regularly visit and examine such people. So it is quite expensive. Moving on to the next important point of differentiation, that is the case control study is used for studying rare diseases. So the case control study, it is used for studying rare diseases, whereas the cohort study is used for studying is not used for studying rare diseases. So the cohort study, it is not used for studying rare diseases, since the population of a particular area what we are observing, it is not used for studying rare diseases. Moving on to the next point of differentiation, the case control study, it cannot give us information about multiple diseases. Obviously, when the case control study, the basic striking feature is we are moving from the effect to cause. So effect to the cause, when we are observing a patient, whether the patient is going to have the cancer or not. So this kind of a patient cannot give us information about multiple diseases, whereas in case of a cohort study, when we look upon, it can give us information about multiple diseases. For example, if a particular sample of a population in a particular area, 100 inhabitants, 100 people are consuming tobacco. So some will develop certain precancerous conditions, some will develop the potential, some will develop the actual cancer. So the precancerous conditions manifested in different tobacco consumers can be looked upon, that in the case of cohort study, when we move from the cause to the effect, that is, the cause is consuming tobacco and effect is the manifestation of oral cancer. So it can be, the cohort study can be used to give information about multiple diseases. Moving on to the last point of differentiation, that is the case control study. It gives us information about the relative risk only, whereas in the case of a cohort study, it gives an estimate about the relative risk as well as the attributable risk. So students, this was a short discussion and the first video of mine on community medicine. So students, if you do like my video, don't forget to subscribe my channel and do press the bell icons for the upcoming videos. Thank you for watching.